I have a rendezvous with death.
There was understandable interest when Jordan Mochi announced his first major game project as a solo indie developer was a Resident Evil and Silent Hill inspired survival horror, but set entirely within World War I, where you play as a French soldier. Just in terms of premise alone, this one enticed me, and with recent hits such as Signalis doing incredibly well, we were very keen to see how he took such a premise and turned it into something that I have to say is very compelling. Firstly, a thanks to Team 17 for the review code. Is this one an evil resident on your Switch, or a silent thrill? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. The game is set within the Great War of 1916, where, stationed in Verdun, the main protagonist is forming a letter to his mother, where he's based in the trenches, and he references his father's watch that he's been looking for, and his brother Pierre who's been injured. Pierre forms a large part of your time within the game, but it also focuses on the plight of soldiers sent to the suicide alley. Known in French as Allée des Suicides, and I'm sure you can guess was a part of the trenches where the survival rate was next to none. The monster in Conscript is war itself, and in many ways is a more powerful and imposing presence than Nemesis ever was. It's here that I'll say you can play the game in a couple of different ways. Now, there are 4 different difficulty modes. As I'll talk about later, there are some survival mechanics here, and depending on what difficulty you choose, those can be more or less impactful to the gameplay. The experience begins with you relatively well equipped, with elements such as a stamina system used to control the amount of time you can sprint for, which becomes quite intrinsic to the gameplay, as we'll see. Let's start with combat. You'll have access to a number of different weapons, such as pistols, rifles, shotguns, with ammunition being scarce and a need to loot the dead bodies of fallen soldiers. There is a heavy emphasis on melee weapons. Things like trench shovels or barbed wire wrapped wood end up being used far more often due to the ammo supply. And the controls here certainly reflect the more clunky origins of the genre. Holding down the left trigger will ready up that melee weapon. The longer you hold it for, the more damage it's going to do, and it'll also stagger enemies more. And it's surprisingly heart-pounding when you're fighting off one enemy to see another approaching from another angle, as you are incredibly vulnerable to damage, particularly in early game before you find things like body armor. Now, while the combat is clunky, as with Resident Evil, its difficulty and clunkiness means that you approach it with caution. Every bullet fired is precious, but also those weapons, the melee ones, gradually degrade, with the cost of both ammo and repair kits being prohibitively expensive. And this is where Conscript contains shades of Metal Gear Solid, believe it or not. There are some sections where you can hide behind a curtain to try and avoid enemies. While this is a nice idea on paper, the AI and line of sight, well, it means that they can be a little superhuman. You can run around a corner and they'll still be able to follow you continuously, and often even ducking into cover won't provide you the respite you think it will. In this regard, it makes the stealth segments a little less effective than they should have been. Now, with that said, it is still good to be able to creep up on enemies without them hearing you, and doing a melee attack from a position like that can mean a one-shot kill. Certainly as you're tiptoeing towards them, hoping that they don't turn around, Conscript can be really exciting. Aside from physical combat, you're also battling against the elements. There is a survival element here at play. Like an early moment where you find yourself mustard gassed, the screen begins to tinge yellow around the edges, and if you're caught within this for too long, it will permanently reduce your health. There are other status effects as well, like being bitten by rats, which causes poisoning. And you'll need to combine items in your inventory to create, for example, antiseptic bandages, where you've taken rags, covered them in alcohol and used them to dress your wounds. Progression then is perhaps the most familiar aspect, certainly in reflection to those older titles. The trench key will unlock all the trench doors until it's no longer needed and it will be discarded. The puzzles will require you to look around the environment, figuring out dates of birth to use as pin codes, and sometimes it will be the environment itself that almost acts like a maze, where you need to find that one specific location. That might sound easy enough, but in a nod, perhaps to Signalis, it also uses light and dark very well. If you're within darkness, you will need to use your torch to see further than your hand in front of your face, but this requires batteries to maintain, and cleverly the torch is also used to highlight hidden doorways. How it does this is through the light shining, as you can see here, to highlight where there's a path that otherwise may be tricky to notice. It was through this method actually that I got stuck for the longest period, with Glen eventually going a direction I just hadn't seen before because I didn't have that torch. It's within the darkness that you can also experience some of your most primal fears as you hear the scream of a German enemy running towards you, hands clasped high on a shovel that they plan to use to cave your head in. To say that Conscript is a game without fear is absolute nonsense. War is inherently terrifying. The fact that you can suffer these diseases, be bitten by rats, get chased down by armoured heavy units, all with limited ammo, while looking for a lost loved one, and with this dank, eerie environment, it's completely horrific. Do all of the elements in Conscript work perfectly? No, they don't. It's got a decent mapping system. I think some of those survival elements don't work as well as they should, but enough of them come together to make it a success. There are some accessibility options in here, like being able to save as many times as you want, obviously when you reach those glowing, calm music-filled rooms that also house the shopkeeper, who might as well have said, "What are you buying?" I found it difficult to put the game down. Conscript's gameplay, that scores 18 out of 20. Controls, although partly intentional, they are a little clunky. They score 15 out of 20. On to visuals and performance, and there's quite a lot going on here. Now firstly, the obvious nods to Resident Evil. Things like the small message at the beginning referring to explicit violence feels like it was taken straight from the Resi series, and some of the static, hand-drawn images using the pixel art, they're also very referential. That isometric fixed perspective works very well, and the gameplay is actually fluid when in motion. Alongside this, the load times are very good, but there are many little details that you'll notice. Even drawn with pixels, the effects like the soldier breathing, the way the body moves, and more disturbingly, those of enemies you'll come across who have suffered wounds and are bleeding out on the ground, they're excellently designed. The only issue as far as performance has to do with the load time when you first boot up the game. There's something going on there because that initial load just takes a very long time, and then when you're in the experience, there's no problems at all. Sound design is incredibly impressive, from the cries of wounded soldiers to the distant thud of artillery and the crunch of enemy boots as you hear them approaching. These are all perfectly juxtaposed to the relaxing and calming music that plays when you enter a save room. Visuals and performance combined score 17 out of 20. The sound and audio scores 18 out of 20. Conscript retails at £21.99, and there is actually a physical of this one available as well, which is nice. There's a deluxe edition that actually includes a couple of different outfits if you want to go that route. It'll take you around 10 to 12 hours to finish, which is great. It doesn't outstay its welcome, and it includes collectibles and hidden notes and different things for you to find if you so choose. That obviously will add on quite a bit of runtime. Its biggest competition on the Switch is Signalis, which is £15.99, and around about the same length, but they offer quite different experiences. I give value 17 out of 20.
I have a rendezvous with death. At some disputed barricade.
Conscript is an excellent game. It takes a genre that we're familiar with, and without trying to sound cliche, manages to make it feel fresh, but also rotten at the same time. War is a fetid and miserable backdrop, the perfect setting for a tense survival battle, and it gets a SwitchUp score of 85%. Let us know in the comments, have you been keeping your eye on this one? Thanks to Team 17 for the review copy, and to all of you that enjoy the content. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it SwitchUp. Cheers guys, see ya!